By your lead Commissioner, my name is Noel, spelled K-N-O-L-L, and I appear for the Australian Academic Alliance Against Antisemitism.
Thank you, Mr. Noel.
Commissioner with leave, my name is Anniewell, A-N-I-W-E-L-L. I appear for the University of Sydney.
Pursuant to the Commission's grant of leave on the 7th of July, I appear for students from Palestine. My name is Hanscom.
Yes, thank you, Ms Hanson.
Commission pleases, also with the Commission's leave, my name is Doyle. I appear for APAN, Australia-Palestine Advocacy Network, with Mr Bakri and Ms Hamzy.
Thank you, Ms Doyle.
Commissioner with leave, my name is Andrew Ewell. I appear with Mr Blumenthal for the Commonwealth.
Yes, thank you, Mr Doyle. Well, a full bar table. Let me start by observing that the Australian Jewish community is a small one, albeit one that has always made an outsized contribution to our society. Melbourne is home to the largest Jewish community, and in recognition of this circumstance, the Commission will be sitting in Melbourne for the next fortnight throughout its 4th and 5th blocks of hearings. I will shortly call on Ms Hager to outline the evidence that she anticipates leading during the university's block this week. The Commission is working to a tight timetable, and it hasn't been feasible to hold hearings in the other states. We've heard evidence, of course, from Jewish Australians living throughout the country, and we will continue to do so. The Commission's terms of reference include examining the circumstances surrounding the Hanukkah attack at Bondi, and understandably the Commission is based in Sydney, which is home to the 2nd largest Jewish community in Australia. There are smaller but distinct Jewish communities in Western Australia, Queensland and South Australia. The Commission's legal and community engagement teams and I have visited each of these states and met with a range of representatives of their communities to gain insight into particular local issues. The Commission is also engaging with other Jewish communities around the country. An important term of reference requires the Commission to assess the impact of anti-Semitism on the daily life of Jewish Australians. This term of reference is being addressed, at least in part, by calling Jewish Australians to give evidence of their lived experience. Lived experience is necessarily personal to the individual. Witnesses describing their experience of anti-Semitism have not been and will not be cross-examined on their evidence in this respect. A sobering reflection on the level of civility of our society is the fact that several witnesses who have given evidence of their experience of anti-Semitism have been subject to ugly anti-Semitic attacks following that evidence. To lessen this risk, some witnesses will be giving evidence under pseudonyms at this hearing. And I take this opportunity to draw to attention the provisions of the Royal Commissions Act, which relevantly make it an indictable offence to cause or inflict any damage, loss or disadvantage to any person on account of evidence given by him or her before a Royal Commission. And on that note, I will turn to Ms Hager.
Commissioner, in this hearing block, the Commission will examine the nature and prevalence of anti-Semitism on university campuses and the responses of universities, government and regulators to that issue. A hearing block focused on universities is appropriate for several reasons. The first is the significant concerns raised in submissions received by the Commission about anti-Semitism at universities, particularly over the last few years. The second is the key role that universities play in shaping Australian society and discourse. As the Australian Human Rights Commission put it in the Respect at Uni report, Australian universities wield extraordinary influence because we trust them to shape minds, nurture pathways to opportunity, and determine what kind of society we become. But as the Commission observed, that influence comes with it a profound duty of care to ensure that everyone feels safe, respected, and included. The third is that universities present an environment where issues of inclusion, safety, freedom of expression, and academic freedom intersect. This presents challenges for universities and government to balance different rights and freedoms. It's not always easy to discern when legitimate expressions of opinion cross the line into anti-Semitism or other forms of racism, particularly in the context of the conflict in the Middle East. Nevertheless, the difficulty of striking that balance cannot be used as an excuse for inaction. The line can and must be drawn. Before I explain how we propose to examine these issues, I note that the Commission will also be considering anti-Semitism across the education sector generally, including primary and secondary education. We heard several witnesses during the first hearing block give evidence about their experiences of anti-Semitism at public and private schools and at Jewish and non-Jewish schools. The Commission has received a statement from Mr. David Gonski, AC, Chair of the Anti-Semitism Education Task Force, which is looking at ways to combat anti-Semitism from early learning through to primary and secondary education. The task force recently released its midpoint update, noting the significant work that has already been undertaken, and Mr. Gonski will be called in a later hearing block to speak to that important work. We'll also be examining in a later hearing block the guidance and training given to staff and teachers to recognise and respond to anti-Semitism in schools. But returning to this week's hearing, we propose to examine anti-Semitism at universities by reference to 4 categories of evidence, which I'll now explain. First, we'll examine the nature and prevalence of anti-Semitism at universities by calling witnesses, including staff and students, to speak of their experiences of anti-Semitism on campus. We'll also call some witnesses who, through their advocacy and representative roles, can provide an overview of the stories they've heard from staff and students. That includes representatives from the Australasian Union of Jewish Students, the Australian Academic Alliance Against Anti-Semitism, and Stand With Us. We'll hear stories of Jewish staff and students being verbally abused, intimidated, and even physically assaulted on campus, as well as the experiences they have had in attempting to navigate university complaints systems, which, while at times producing satisfactory resolution, have also been perceived as being overly complex, lacking transparency, or not committed to genuine change in some cases. We'll hear stories of Nazi salutes to a Jewish teacher in the classroom, Jews being called baby killers or genocide supporters, the term Zios being used as a slur, and Jewish staff and students taking steps to hide their Jewish identity on campus. A recurring theme is Jewish staff and students being assumed to take a particular position on the conflict in the Middle East simply by virtue of being Jewish or being Israeli. As we've heard in other hearing blocks, and we'll hear again this week, there are diverse views amongst the Jewish community as to that conflict. Many Jews are opposed to the actions of the government of Israel. Indeed, there are Jews who do not identify as Zionist or do not identify with the State of Israel at all. We'll hear, for example, from Professor Dennis Altman, whose view is that the elision of the Jewish people with the State of Israel is one key driver of anti-Semitism. We'll also hear evidence about the impact of protest activity and encampments at various universities. This is an area where the interaction between freedom of speech and the right to safety and inclusion is particularly stark. No one doubts the importance of being able to debate the conflict in the Middle East, including the actions of the government of Israel in Gaza. No one doubts the importance of being able to express support for the Palestinian people. We'll hear evidence from Yasmin Johnson, who's a national coordinator of Students for Palestine and who's also Jewish, on that topic amongst others. But I anticipate the evidence will show that there have been instances where protest on these issues has crossed the line. And it's because of instances of that kind that many Jewish staff and students say that they've felt anxious and even unsafe on campus, particularly during the encampment period. Another forum in which freedom and safety intersect is the discussion of the conflict within the classroom itself. Again, no one suggests this topic should be off limits or denies the importance of robust discussions on the issue. Academic freedom is vital. The concern of some witnesses is that in some cases, discussion of this topic has lacked balance and diverse perspectives. And this is an area where the line between what is appropriate and what is not, I recognise, is particularly difficult to draw. Finally, Commissioner, I note your determination that some of the witnesses should give evidence under a pseudonym, as you've noted, and in some cases without showing their faces on the live stream, and those arrangements reflect earlier non-publication orders that you've issued. And it may be a criminal offence or contempt of the Commission to breach such an order. As part of the lived experience evidence, you'll see, Commissioner, that in some cases the names of universities or the individual alleged perpetrators of anti-Semitic incidents have been omitted or redacted. And in some cases this is because of the witness's own preference. But it's also important to note that evidence of incidents on campus is being brought forward to understand the nature and prevalence of anti-Semitism and to assist in making recommendations to address it. It's not the Commission's role to issue rulings on the conduct of individual alleged perpetrators of anti-Semitism, and for that reason, generally, it's not necessary to disclose their identifying information. The second category of evidence comprises various surveys and studies addressing the nature and prevalence of anti-Semitism and other forms of racism at universities. This will include evidence from the President of the Australian Human Rights Commission, who will speak to the Respect at Uni report published in February this year, and Dr. Bren Carlisle, who conducted a survey of the experiences of Jewish students, and that took place prior to 7 October 2023. I anticipate that evidence will show that anti-Semitism at universities is not a new thing. As Dr. Carlisle explains, it was present to a concerning degree even prior to 7 October. But the evidence also suggests an uptick in anti-Semitism since October 7, and, as the Human Rights Commission's report reveals, those events have also impacted anti-Palestinian and anti-Muslim sentiment. The third category is evidence addressing the responses of universities to anti-Semitism and how those responses might be improved. To this end, we'll call the Vice-Chancellors of various universities who've provided the Commission with detailed statements outlining how they've responded to anti-Semitism on campus, including how they've responded to encampments and other protests, their complaints procedures, and what guidance and training they've given to staff and students. We're grateful to the universities for their cooperation in this process and the assistance they've given to the Commission to date. While we are only calling Vice-Chancellors from certain universities, the Commission has received statements from various others and examined the responses of all universities to the University Report Card project conducted by Professor Greg Craven and commissioned by the Special Envoy to combat anti-Semitism, so as to obtain an understanding of how universities are performing across the board. In terms of making recommendations as to how university practice and procedure might be improved, I acknowledge that this topic has already been the subject of a number of inquiries and reports by various bodies and organisations. They include the report of the Legal and Constitutional Affairs Legislation Committee from October 2024, the report of the Parliamentary Joint Committee on Human Rights in February 2025, the Respect at Uni report from the Australian Human Rights Commission that I've already mentioned, the Framework for Addressing Anti-Semitism in Australian Universities, published by Professor Sluky and his team at Monash University, the report of Professor Craven, which I've already mentioned, in which he concluded that there's been a sector-wide failure to adopt a definition of anti-Semitism, and most recently, the report of the Group of Eight's Expert Advisory Committee on Combating Anti-Semitism, led by Dr. Alan Finkel, AO. The result has been a series of overlapping recommendations from various bodies over a number of years. Work has already been undertaken by a number of universities to address those recommendations, but most of them recognise that there's still significant improvements to be made. One task for the Commission will be to identify where the focus for further improvement should lie. We'll hear evidence from Hugh de Kretser, the President of the Human Rights Commission, as well as Dr. Finkel and Professor Sluky on the recommendations they have made. There are a few key themes that emerge across the various studies and reports, including the need for comprehensive policies and procedures regulating staff and student conduct, including an adoption of a definition of anti-Semitism, clear and responsive complaint handling mechanisms, meaningful training in anti-Semitism and racism generally for staff and students, and transparency in reporting of complaints data to university governance and to the public. Finally, we will call witnesses from the Department of Education and the Higher Education Regulator to speak to legislative and regulatory measures to address anti-Semitism. The Tertiary Education Quality and Standards Agency, or TEQSA, is the national regulator of higher education under the Tertiary Education Quality and Standards Act 2011. Its functions are primarily focused on the regulation of higher education providers, guided by the Higher Education Standards Framework Threshold Standards 2021. The standards set certain minimum requirements for entering and operating within the higher education sector. Several of those standards already address matters relevant to combating anti-Semitism, racism and social cohesion. Providers are responsible for addressing these matters, and TEQSA's responsibility is to seek evidence-based assurances from providers that they have appropriate governance structures, policies and procedures in place to meet the expectations set out in the standards. If TEQSA does not receive adequate assurances, then it can impose administrative sanctions, such as imposing conditions on a provider's registration, shortening their registration period, or even cancelling registration. TEQSA can also impose financial penalties if a provider breaches a condition of registration. However, TEQSA does not investigate or resolve complaints of racism or discrimination and is not empowered to make a determination of whether providers are operating in accordance with their legal obligations in that regard. During the heightened period of anti-Semitism at universities following October 7, TEQSA's response was essentially focused on engagement with universities, staff and students, issuing guidance to universities about their policies and procedures, and seeking assurances from universities on the actions that they'd taken. Later in the week, we'll hear evidence from Dr. Russell, the CEO of TEQSA, about the steps it took in this regard over the last few years. Some have expressed the view that the higher education standards and TEQSA's powers have been insufficient to address anti-Semitism at universities over the last few years. And as Ms. Joldish from the Department of Education will explain, the government's response to the Special Envoy's plan included a commitment to strengthening higher education regulation to ensure institutions address anti-Semitism, Islamophobia and other forms of racism. The Minister for Education sought the advice of the Higher Education Standards Panel, which undertook a consultation on, among other things, addressing racism, governance principles and transparency requirements. New standards have very recently been approved, which will impose obligations on universities to address racism, including an obligation to adopt a definition for specific forms of racism, such as antisemitism, Islamophobia and racism against Indigenous Australians. The government has also committed to reviewing TEX's powers under the Act. The Department of Education published a consultation paper last year seeking views on the opportunities to strengthen and modernise TEX's powers, and Ms Jolich will also explain where that process is up to. Commissioner, I conclude by noting again the protections available to those engaging with the Royal Commission. The Royal Commission's Act of the Commonwealth and its state equivalents contains statutory protections for witnesses, as you've noted. The Commission has already received evidence of the vilification and abuse received by witnesses appearing before it, particularly online, and as has been reported, there's already been one referral to the AFP and charges laid in that respect.
Yes, thank you, Ms Hager. I propose now taking a short adjournment so that we can rearrange after the media leave us.
Friends, please stand. Please be seated. The Royal Commission on Anti-Semitism and Social Cohesion is now in session.
Yes, Ms Hagan.
Commissioner, I now call the first witness, who will be known as Liat. There is a non-publication order in place in respect of her identifying information, and she is already in the witness box.
Yes, indeed. Will you take an oath or make an affirmation?
An oath.
Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Please say I do.
I do.
Liat, I'll just refer to you as Liat for the purposes of today. You've prepared a statement for the Royal Commission dated 9 July 2026, correct? And you have a copy of that statement there with you?
Yes,
And is that statement still true and correct to the best of your knowledge and belief?
it is.
Right, could I just ask you to speak up a little bit
Yes.
during the questions?
Sorry.
Thank you. That's all right. Commissioner, I tender that statement. Its reference is stat.899.0098.0001_R.
Yes, the statement will be admitted as an exhibit.
Liat, you grew up in Sydney, correct?
Yes,
And you describe yourself as a child born of Israeli-born parents, is that right?
yes,
And you are Jewish.
I am.
You moved to Canberra in 2022 to study at the ANU,
I did.
and you describe yourself as both proudly Jewish and proudly Zionist, is that right?
Correct.
And what does Zionism mean to you?
Well, Zionism is the right of Jewish people to self-determine in their ancestral homeland of Israel, and my definition aligns with that broader definition of Zionism.
You're also a grandchild and great-grandchild of Holocaust survivors, is that right?
That's correct.
You attended Jewish day schools,
Mhm.
and you grew up in a community where you say you felt your Jewish and Zionist identities felt protected.
Absolutely.
I then want to ask you about your first year at university. And in your statement at paragraph 9, you describe a visit to a stall at Orientation Week in 2022 at the campus market day. Could you tell us about your experience on that occasion?
Absolutely. This was a week of 2022. It's the most exciting time of a university student's life. I didn't know that the Jewish Student Society, that August existed at the time, so I was very, very excited to find my fellow Jews on campus, specifically because I'd moved away from home, I'd moved away from my community, I was freshly 18. So when I saw the Middle Eastern Society stall, I was very excited. Here's where the Jews are. I then started scanning a QR code to join the society and was approached by one of the people at the stall who asked me where I was from, what my heritage was, why I was interested in joining the Middle Eastern Society. And I told the individual that my parents were born in Israel, famously in the Middle East, and therefore I was excited to join the society and connect with my fellow people of Israeli heritage and fellow Jews. I then remember she almost took a beat. And you could see in her face that she was making a decision on what to say to me next. And she sort of looked me up and down and went, "This isn't the society for you. You know, you're not Middle Eastern, you're Jewish." And that, again, I was freshly 18. I had no idea. You know, I was raised in the Jewish bubble, so to speak, and I didn't really know that was a thing. And I was exceptionally taken aback. I was scared, but I said, okay, it's clearly not for me. I walked down the rest of University Avenue and found August.
You also describe how you found a home in the university's Shakespeare Society, is that right? And what was that experience like for you?
I mean, I've always been a massive Shakespeare nerd, so I was very excited to join the Shakespeare Society. I did a few shows with them in first year and then decided to join the executive, and I was elected as the treasurer at the end of 2022. And we finished the AGM and I was elected. It was very exciting. And immediately my friends, came up to me, gave me a hug. Oh, of course, you're the treasurer, you're the Jew. I couldn't even, enjoy what I felt was a very monumental moment in my university society involvement, because I was first and foremost the Jew. I don't think they were necessarily in bad faith, these jokes. There was a lot of, Jews are good with money, well, your nose matches the role, those sorts of comments that play on very classical tropes of anti-Semitism. But I really thought, okay, this is the big wide world. Sometimes people make unsavory jokes. But these jokes, they carried the implicit implication that I would take them in good faith, that I wouldn't be the Jew who got offended. And I was the youngest person on the executive and in the society circle more broadly by a good couple of years. And so I didn't feel that I was capable of pushing back against that, regardless of how inappropriate it was. So I brushed the comments off, and I think it's very indicative of, especially pre-October 7, the sort of low-level hum of anti-Semitism that exists on campus and in these societies.
Can I then take you forward to October 7, 2023? What sort of impact did the events of that day have on you and your family?
I mean, I remember feeling just this sense of numb horror and a sort of terrible foreboding that what was going to happen on campus and in the world next was going to be really, really shocking and awful for Jews, as it had been on October 7. Most of my family lives in Israel. During October 7, I was glued to my phone, texting my cousins who didn't have Wi-Fi in the bomb shelter, and there's the fear of the people you love who are huddled together for their lives, and there's the fear of your broader community who is about to go through hell. I remember the residential college that I lived at the time at the ANU organised a sort of a small processing circle, which was it was lovely at the time. It was kind of the first time that we, as the Jewish community at the college, had spoken about the already rising anti-Semitism we were seeing at the time. I recall about 12 of us there, and the atmosphere, the sort of thick air of the room really remains quite vivid to me, in that this was, you could smell the anxiety and the anticipation of what was already happening and what was about to come, and the sort of pervasive fear about what we as Jews would become in the university, what October 7th would mean for us as Jews. And for many of us, it was the first time we had spoken about what being a Jew on campus is like, and how unsafe we'd become to feel on campus, and that the recognition of each other and also the sort of communal apprehension was both a comfort and a source of deeper unease.
You describe in your statement how over the rest of 2023 you lost the vast majority of your non-Jewish university friends, and in one instance one person told you that they could no longer be friends with you because you were a Zionist.
Yeah.
What was that experience like for you?
We were at a theatre after party, and I was chatting with a group of friends. Someone came to join. The individual looked at me and then said, "Oh, I can't talk to you. We're not friends anymore. You're a Zionist." And it was with that level of matter-of-factness. Obviously, it's a theatre after party. It's not exactly time for the severing of year-long friendships or political commentary. And again, I was very taken aback and deeply hurt that someone so flippantly could just go, "Well, you're of Israeli heritage, you can't possibly be my friend. And that was the sort of the key instance that stuck with me. But the majority of the people who were my friends at the time just stopped talking to me entirely.
Can I then take you to 2024 and paragraph 17 of your statement? There you referred to 2 articles that were published in the Welcome magazine issued by the university's Students' Association. And am I right in thinking those magazines were distributed via the residential halls at ANU to all the students at the university?
All the students that were living on campus.
Yes. And before we go to the content of these articles, can I take it that you have no issue with those who want to write about or advocate for Palestine as long as it's done in a respectful and safe manner?
Of course.
And you have no issue, I take it, with criticism, even strong criticism of the actions of the government of Israel?
No issue.
But you identify in your statement one line in particular that I wanted to ask you about from one of these articles, and that is a statement that, so it was said, Zionism is a far-right political project and the State of Israel is run by war criminals and proponents of genocide. Why have you singled out that statement in your evidence?
In my opinion, and I think in a lot of Jews' opinion, it plays on the very classical anti-Semitic trope that Jews are particularly murderous. Often that manifests as a form of blood libel. And there's a Rabbi Sachs quote, I think, that says that you can tell exactly what a society deems to be its most sort of irredeemable quality by what it calls its Jews. And in this case, calling Zionism a far-right political project, I think, is an example of that. Run by war criminals and proponents of genocide, portrays Jews as uniquely and distinctly bloodthirsty and murderous.
All right, and so do I understand you to say that the mere, if we took a different context, the mere allegation that Israel is engaging in genocide in Gaza, do you see that in and of itself as being anti-Semitic, or was it just the particular context in which it was deployed here?
I mean, a lot of this stuff is incredibly context dependent. You can propose that Israel is doing a myriad of things if you have backing for it. I've yet to see from a lot of these groups backing that doesn't play on the tropes of anti-Semitism. And I think in that sense, it's very hard. I just haven't really seen examples that accuse Israel of doing things without playing on those tropes, but I'm sure it's possible.
I understand. You raised an issue with the Dean of Students at ANU about these articles, is that right? And what was the Dean's response?
I'll read directly from the statement, but he said, "The role of this office is to provide informal, impartial and confidential advice to students about matters troubling them. As such, I have no authority to either remove these articles from the ANUSA Welcome Pack nor to investigate how they got published."
And what was your reaction to that response?
I was a little bit shocked because I had written to the Dean asking for informal, impartial and confidential advice. And I just assumed that I was following the correct procedure in that sense, and I was saddened that they didn't seem to want to find a way to help me, in my opinion.
So subsequently, the Australasian Union of Jewish Students met with the Students' Association to raise these concerns, is that right?
Mm-hmm.
And are you aware of any action that was taken following that in respect of the magazines?
I'm not.
Right. The Commission has received some evidence that at least in some residence halls the magazines were bundled up and returned. Are you aware of that?
No, but that's very heartening to hear.
Right. Can I ask you then about the encampment that took place at the university? That was established on around 29 April 2024, is that right?
Correct.
And you deal with this from paragraph 28 of your statement. It was styled as a Gaza solidarity camp, is that right?
Correct.
And it lasted for about 110 days?
Yes.
And on your understanding, is that the longest running encampment at any university that you're aware of?
I believe so.
Can you just tell us what it looked like? Were there a range of tents erected?
An encampment in general is a series of tents and semi-permanent structures like marquees, for example. And it's, to my understanding, designed to be placed in a thoroughfare at the university to sort of disrupt business as usual as much as it possibly can, to draw attention to events going on the other side of the world. It also manifested through some demands that they asked of the university, severing ties, both financial and academic, from Israeli institutions and weapons companies, but primarily it held the university and its wider community responsible for severing those ties and sometimes for the actions of Israel. At ANU itself, the encampment was set up in the middle of the Canberra precinct, which is truly the beating heart of the ANU. It has restaurants and, well, cafes, and where I had the vast majority of my classes, the student union's office, my gym that I attended. It was also opposite a residential college. So it was truly the main thoroughfare on campus.
And it was also situated at that time in what you understood to be the main emergency evacuation area for the university?
For the buildings surrounding it and the college that was right next to it, I believe.
Yes. And you observed people to be living and sleeping in the encampment?
Yes.
Right. And protests were held there from time to time?
At least a couple of times a week, if not every day.
Right. And flags and banners of various kinds?
Correct.
And you also observed that it involved not only students but external organisations. What's the basis for your belief in that regard?
Oftentimes they had banners and signs that had the name of their organisations on them.
I see. And a high proportion of university students from the ANU live on campus, is that right? And that included you at the time, or?
By 2024, I had moved off campus.
I see. But for those who did live on campus, they were encountering this encampment on a daily basis.
It's important to note that at ANU, it is the most beautiful community. It really is. And when you live in college, the library is your backyard. Canberra is, your playground, so to speak. So the impact of the encampments was not only that they were there and disruptive, which they were, but also the fact that there was no respite for people who wanted to maybe not encounter a protest every single day. This was our living room. This was our backyard.
You've made some observations at paragraph 33 of your statement. I'd wonder if you'd just read out that paragraph for us.
I say it's important to state clearly that the display of a Palestinian flag or a keffiyeh is not in itself necessarily anti-Semitic. The concern documented here is of a different character. The cumulative intimidatory effect of an environment saturated with such symbols, combined with the slogans of violent or hateful import, produces conditions in which anti-Semitism becomes an accepted mode of expression. That conflation causes harm to Jewish students and to the cause of legitimate political advocacy alike.
In a moment, I'll come to some of the examples of chants and the like that you heard at the encampment. But I just wanted to ask you about paragraph 35 of your statement. Before I do that. You say there that your mother lived in Jerusalem during the Second Intifada. Is that right? And what did she tell you about her experiences of that time?
She was on exchange in Jerusalem, and she would tell me about the absolute pervasive fear that really gripped the whole country, but especially her as someone who was born in Israel, had slightly grown up in Israel, but mainly viewed herself as an Australian, and thought of getting on a bus to go visit her friends, and the possibility of not making it because the bus would have been blown up, or seeing an unattended backpack in a busy thoroughfare, and feeling that instant pang of, oh, we should call the bomb squad or something of that nature, and that's followed her through a lot of her life and her experience, but also I think that sort of sense of hypervigilance has been transferred to me in some respects, particularly after the fire bombings in Sydney and the Bondi terror attack.
At paragraph 37, you give some examples of what you were called when you passed by the encampment. What did you hear?
I was called a baby killer and a genocide supporter with relative regularity, and I believe it's partially because people knew who I was. I was never particularly quiet about the fact that I was Jewish. I wore a big Magen David. I sometimes wore a hostage pin, and I'm also a pretty small person, and I think in that sense I felt very physically unsafe when people would laugh or leer at me and say, "Look at the baby killer, look at the genocide supporter." The fact that a stranger could look at a fellow human being and say that in the first place is horrific. And again, this was the place that I lived at for the last 2 years.
You also, going back to paragraph 34 of your statement, give some examples of the chants that you heard during the encampment. What were those? The two key ones are, there is only one solution, Intifada revolution, and from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. So can I ask you about the first one? There's only one solution, Intifada revolution. In light of the experiences that your mother had and told you about, how do you interpret that phrase when you hear it?
There are two parts to it. The first is the reference to a solution, which in my mind calls a reminiscence of the final solution of the Jewish question. But then also the use of the word intifada is, in my opinion, reference to the historical events that are referred to as the First and the Second Intifada, which involved the murder of Jews.
Now, some of those who use that sort of language suggest that they're not calling for violence against Jewish people. They're, for example, just calling for the liberation of Palestine. How do you react to that?
I think perhaps they should choose a different word.
And in respect of the language from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, how do you interpret that phrase?
I interpret it as the call for the removal, the freedom of the land of Israel from the Mediterranean River, Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea, from its Jewish population.
What do you say to the suggestion by some that it's merely calling for the ability of Palestinian people to move freely within the state of Israel?
I think that is a conversation that needs to extend beyond a chant.
I see. You also say that throughout this time you made a conscious choice about whether to identify yourself as Jewish. Can you explain to us how you wrestled with that decision?
I mean, absolutely. The core part of myself, the way I view the world, is through the lens of my Judaism, religiously as well as sort of practically and pragmatically. My name is Hebrew. It's impossible to avoid in that sense. But every single day when I would make the walk into uni, I would have to pick: am I Jewish Liat today, or am I regular Leah? I wouldn't use my name ordering at coffee shops for fear that someone would ask me where it's from. I would often tuck my Magen David into my shirt because I just didn't want to open myself up to what I had observed being this sort of hatred leveled against myself, but also my peers, and my peers at other Australian universities and in America, for example. But that series of micro calculations that you make every single day and at every single instance is exhausting. It takes an absolute mental toll on trying to study and socialize. Whether I refer to myself by my own name at a coffee shop is a decision I would never thought to have made, and it made me think about a whole host of things about my safety at the ANU and in Australia more broadly.
From paragraph 39, you describe a counter-protest that you were involved in. Can you tell us about that?
1 second. This was relatively later on in the encampment period, and I had several Jewish students come to me and said, we'd like to organise a counter-protest. I helped them do so. We had coordinated pretty extensively with ANU security at the time, who were quite helpful to us. It was bizarre in that the encampment was sort of on the grass at Canberra. There was about 20 to 30 metres of no man's land, for want of a better word, peppered with security personnel. And then there were maybe 50 Jewish students, plus a couple of non-Jewish students. We brought Israeli flags and we sung songs, and that was our counter-protest. And it was really heavily raining. We all got completely wet, and it was a very cathartic moment for me personally, to show that we're still here, and despite the fact that our campus at the moment was not the safe space for Jews that as it should be, we're not going to acquiesce to that. Yeah.
You say that during that protest you observed someone from the encampment perform a Nazi salute. Is that right?
Yes.
Sorry, to clarify, was it someone from the encampment or just somebody else passing by?
We raised the issue with the university, who I believe reviewed the security footage. According to the university, which I assume would be correct, they were not a member of the university in any capacity, but came up to us, despite us being surrounded by security, during the counter-protest, again, singing songs, and performed a Nazi salute, and shouted obscenities at us, and then sort of scurried away.
You go on to describe an AGM that you attended in 2024 of the University Student Association, from paragraph 41 of your statement. Mm-hmm. About 650 people attended via Zoom, is that right?
Yeah.
And you had put forward a motion for debate at that meeting, is that correct?
Correct.
And is that the motion which is attached to your statement? I'll just give you the page number. If you use the numbers in the bottom right-hand corner and go through to page 30.
Might have to use this statement.
Oh, it should be in that folder there, yes.
See. Many papers and such. Sorry. Any day now.
That's all right. Take your time.
Here we go.
All right. So is this, are you looking at a version that has markup in red on it?
Yes.
And does this represent the motion that you put forward at the meeting, but the markups indicate the amendments that were suggested by others at that meeting?
Correct.
All right. And the motion was entitled Jewish Students Have a Right to Belong to the ANU Community,
Yes.
and it called for, among other things, for the Student Association to condemn Hamas.
Mm-hmm.
Yes?
Yes.
And point 2 there is to call for a two-state solution to end the conflict in the Middle East.
Correct.
And there are a number of other aspects to the motion.
Yes.
The 6th point was condemn the use of slogans which include calls for an intifada as anti-Semitic hate speech, which
Yes.
is not welcome within the ANUSA environment. Yes?
Correct.
And also at point 7, affirm that Jewish students have a right to participate in the student association in a discrimination-free environment.
Correct.
And at point 8, affirms that Jewish students have a right to participate and belong to the university community. Correct?
Correct.
All right, and then there are other aspects to that motion. You put forward this motion and spoke to it at the meeting?
Yes, I was the seconder.
All right, and what was that experience like for you speaking in support of that motion?
I mean, I, by and large, don't usually get particularly nervous public speaking. In that instance, there was the meeting itself, which was 650 people on a Zoom, which is intimidating in and of itself. But there was significant sort of on-campus hype, for want of a better word, in leading up to the meeting. That by the time the AGM had arrived, it was very tense. I believe it was supposed to be an in-person meeting, which they had then moved to Zoom because of the amount of attention that it got, which I think was a wise decision. I was so scared. I could hear my heart beating in my ears, like thundering in my ears. I was quite clammy. I was shaking, and my parents had also sort of said that maybe it's not worth doing all of this. Maybe you should just kind of, okay, like, you're Jewish, please just don't put yourself in harm's way in that sense. And those concerns were not unfounded in my opinion. But I think I knew I had to find the courage to speak at that meeting and to second that motion that I believed in so strongly, because I thought at the time, and I still think, that the silence of Jewish students in those spaces would have been read as acquiescence, and I wasn't prepared to let that happen. And so others at the meeting proposed some amendments to that motion, Yes.
which we see recorded in the markup.
Yes.
One of which was to strike out the condemnation of Hamas, correct?
Yes.
And to strike out the call for a two-state solution to end the conflict in the Middle East, correct?
Yep.
And strike out the condemnation of the use of slogans
Correct.
that were identified. But it did leave in place point 7, affirming Jewish students have a right to participate in the Students' Association.
Yes.
And it left in place the affirmation that Jewish students have a right to participate and belong to the university community.
Yes.
What was your reaction when those amendments were proposed? how did you feel about that?
I mean, there's such a bitter irony to the whole situation that we put forward a motion in front of our university community that says that we have a right to belong here, and they completely removed that. I think it was point 8, that affirms that Jewish students have a right to participate and belong to the university community. And I suppose it was shown that we had perhaps a right to participate, but certainly not a right to belong to the community. And we ended up withdrawing the motion because we weren't prepared to let it pass in its butchered form.
So just so I understand, the amendments that were proposed left in place that affirmation of the right to participate and belong, but what
Yes.
you're saying is that the other amendments made you feel like, in
That
fact, you
was
didn't
not
have a
the
right
case.
to belong.
Yes.
I see.
I think it's worth sort of mentioning at that moment how hopeless I felt about the whole thing. I know that student politics is not the be-all and end-all of the world, but when you're on campus, it is a significant part of the way you interpret how the university feels about you, how the student population feels about you, rather. And to be honest, if a room full of my peers couldn't bring themselves to condemn a terrorist organisation or affirm in plain terms that Jewish students deserve to feel safe on their own campus, it was very hard to see what ground there was left to stand on as a Jew at the ANU.
And is it right that at this time the Students' Association had a policy in place prohibiting interruptions and heckling and the holding up of
Yes.
signs while
Yes.
another student was speaking?
Correct.
Is that right? All right. While you say that while Jewish students were speaking in support of this motion, other students in the meeting were holding up certain items. What did you observe?
They were holding up physical Palestinian flags and keffiyehs, often covering their cameras as Jewish students spoke, but also pressing various emojis, which is also, I believe, treated as heckling.
What sort of emojis were they bringing up?
I know there were various emojis, but I recall specifically Palestinian flags as well.
All right. And at various times, the chair of the meeting issued warnings that holding up items while other students were speaking would be treated as heckling.
Yes.
Is that right? Did the conduct persist after those warnings?
I believe it did.
Right.
I believe there were multiple warnings, which makes me think it persisted.
All right. It was also reported to you by others in that meeting that they observed someone to be doing a Nazi salute. Is that right?
Correct.
But you didn't see that yourself?
Well, it was as I was speaking,
All right.
so I was looking at my speech.
Okay. And it was also reported to you that someone in the meeting had allegedly used a gesture indicating a Nazi moustache.
Correct.
Again, you didn't see that yourself. It was reported to you by others.
Correct.
All right. You ultimately decided to withdraw the motion,
Correct.
and that was because of the amendments that had been proposed. Is that
Yes.
right? By this time, you were a member of Augis ACT,
Yes.
and Augis ACT made a complaint to the university about the meeting. Is that
Yes.
correct? About the conduct of other students in that meeting.
Correct.
Did you ever find out about the outcome of that complaint?
We did, but not through the formal complaints process. We found out during the parliamentary inquiry.
All right. By reference to some evidence that the Vice-Chancellor of the ANU gave at that inquiry?
Correct, and I
see.
believe the Deputy Vice-Chancellor as well.
Oh, I see. At paragraph 57 of your statement, you also describe an incident that you experienced in the classroom on one occasion. Can you tell us about that incident?
Yes, it was a political philosophy course, and I believe it was the last class of the semester. So I was very excited for the holidays, and we were looking at civil disobedience, and the tutor at the time posited that the encampment was a very exemplary illustration of the concept of civil disobedience, and I noted that the encampment had a very intimidatory and isolating effect on Jewish students, just truly not even a comment on the encampment itself, just saying, I'm a Jew and I feel intimidated and scared by the encampment at times. And the tutor, again, took breath, leaned back in his chair and said, well, Israel's dropping bombs on heads. And then I said, that's not particularly relevant, you know, as a Jewish Australian and as an Australian Israeli, like I don't think that's necessarily the appropriate thing to say in that instance. And again, he sort of gave me a once over and goes, you're Israeli. And I said, I'm an Australian Israeli, yes. Well, that's a shame. And you could feel the weight of what was just said on the classroom. Everyone sort of did a big exhale of, oof, that was rough. But no one said anything, which, I mean, that was kind of like, to have that said to you in the first place is horrific, and to be sitting in a classroom about 25 and no one said a word, no one looked me in the eye, they just sat there.
You then go on to describe some of your experiences the following year in 2025.
Yes.
And by that point, you had been elected co-president of August ACT, is that
Correct.
right? And at paragraph 68 of your statement, you refer to an official communication issued by the university's Vice-Chancellor and President at the time on 10 May 2024 in relation to the encampment. What struck you about that announcement?
Several things. The first is, I suppose, the systematic absence of any reference to Jews or anti-Semitism in a letter responding to a period that, in my opinion, and I think is pretty widely accepted, had a very high instance of anti-Semitism, and certainly a lot of media attention surrounding the instances. And the second is that the framing addressed, again, the campus community in very generic terms, offering support to those feeling vulnerable without specifying the types of students that were feeling vulnerable. And in my opinion, communication of this character, particularly with the flippant ending of cheers, when speaking about something as serious as the ANU condemns Hamas, really identifies sort of the broader pattern of the institutional management that I experienced at the ANU.
You go on to describe a presentation that you gave in your capacity as co-president to the academic board
Yes.
of the ANU in May 2025.
Yes.
What was that presentation about?
We had been in communication with the uni for some time, both as AUGUS for many years and myself and my executive, about the adoption of the Universities Australia Statement on Racism, which includes an anti-Semitism definition. And we had been asked by the chair of academic board to make a presentation to the board as they were considering integrating that into university policy, I believe.
And one aspect of your argument on that day, as you describe at paragraph 74, is that you can't fix an issue that's not defined.
Absolutely.
Is that right?
Well, you certainly can't begin to fix an issue that's, if you don't have any parameters about what the issue is.
And you delivered your presentation. What was the reaction to it on that day?
First of all, the place where Academic Board was at the time was the large boardroom on top of the Chancellery building. It's an absolutely beautiful room, but it's very grand, it's very intimidatory. And it was myself and a fellow member of the Augis ACT executive surrounded by the people who govern our university. And you know, there's a great many brilliant people in that room, and we certainly felt the weight of what we were doing as we were doing it. I gave what was about a 40-minute presentation, sort of taking the board through various points and arguments. And I'm finding the specific place where I wrote down, because I think that's the best sort of way to describe it. But there we go. Essentially, I had finished. It was a very long presentation. I kind of visibly relaxed following the presentation, and we had been told to prepare for quite a few questions, and those questions didn't come. We got one question from the chair of the academic board about an issue that we had addressed in a meeting previous. It was clear to me that he was just trying to fill in the silence, and it was a silence that hung very heavy in the air. Again, no one looked me in the face. No one really responded to me. Everyone, I felt that everyone was waiting for somebody else to break the ice to ask a question. The chair did, and that was it.
You were then contacted a few weeks later, and you were told what the university had decided to do about adopting a definition of anti-Semitism. What were you told? That they were not, in fact, going to adopt any definition of anti-Semitism. They were going to incorporate a broader statement of racism, against racism rather, a definition of racism in university policy. And at paragraph 80, you note that Augis ACT released a statement in respect of that decision. Correct. Could you read out the part that's quoted at paragraph 80 for us? This refusal sends a deeply concerning message to Jewish students at ANU, that the ANU is unwilling to institute any meaningful measures to protect us from hateful conduct. It is especially alarming given that ANU, as a member of Universities Australia, previously endorsed the very definition it now declines to adopt. To walk away from that commitment is not just inconsistent, it is a betrayal of principle. You're aware that in February this year, the Council of the ANU did vote to adopt a definition of anti-Semitism? Indeed. At the end of your statement, you conclude with some observations about your experience at university. I'm so sorry, can we go back to that previous question? Certainly. It's my understanding that the ANU has, and I'm more than happy to be corrected on this, the ANU has decided to adopt the first paragraph of the Universities Australia definition, which doesn't mention Zionism. It doesn't say that criticism of Israel is not inherently anti-Semitic or cannot always be anti-Semitism. And yeah. Sorry. That's all right. You conclude with some reflections on your time at university and what you describe as certain institutional failings, starting from paragraph 84. Could you just speak to those paragraphs and what you perceive to be the failings during your time at university? Absolutely. I sort of identified three pretty consistent patterns across my experience at university. The first was the delayed or absent action. We reported as many anti-Semitic incidents as our 5-person executive could manage through the proper channels. We
really wanted to, follow the book, the letter of the law, so to speak. And among those complaints were the Nazi gestures at the general meeting and the Nazi salute at the counter-protest. And in my experience, the university either did nothing, unfortunately, or responded so late that the response really protected no one and corrected nothing. And over time, Jewish students at the ANU learnt that reporting an incident cost them a lot of effort, re-traumatised them from the incident, and returned them, in most cases, silence or inaction, which meant they stopped bothering. The second was a sort of pattern of deflection, so to speak. We had various meetings throughout my time as co-president of ACT Augis with members of the university executive, which we were very grateful for at the time and remain very grateful for. But in those meetings, oftentimes, we were told, don't worry, we'll handle it. You don't need to make a report. And I think in that instance, those members of staff, I don't believe they were trying to be malicious. But what resulted is that we didn't have a record of a lot of the complaints that were raised with the university, and therefore we had no way to really track it. And in my opinion, sort of an institution that doesn't want to name anti-Semitism in public has already decided not to really respond to it in private. And the third was the management, in my opinion, of optics over substance. My experience in a lot of these meetings was that the university cared far more about how it was portrayed, that it was tackling racism as best as it could, over actually tackling the racism on campus. And the framing that we were met with a lot of these meetings was that Jewish students needed to be patient, we needed to respect the processes and the institutions, which we did, and to understand that there were competing interests at play, which we understood, and to accept that the situation was complicated. But that complication, in my opinion, always resolved, or usually resolved, at the expense of Jewish student safety on campus.
And you conclude your statement with some reflections on your time at university and how you look back on it. How do you view those few years now? I mean, I wish I could. I should be able to look back on those years, which are some of the most formative of one's young adult life, as years of learning super interesting things, which I did, and making lots of friends, which I did and then lost, as beautiful periods of growth and intellectual discovery and fun. I mean, I was living out of home for the first time. It's fun. It should be fun. And sort of enjoying all the things that a university is meant to afford. And for the most part, I can't do that. I spent the majority of my university education in an environment that was characterized by people justifying and excusing and sometimes encouraging the murder, the rape, and the brutalization of people on the other side of the world and here, because those people happen to be Jewish. And I did all that, and I navigated the hostility, the isolation, the institutional failure as I was trying to study, as I was trying to make friends and go out to lay the foundations of a career and maintain my integrity and my identity as a Jewish person in Australia, in a setting that frequently made that difficult. And I carried what I would call a burden, unfortunately, while my non-Jewish peers, by and large, did not. I shouldn't have had to. Commissioner, I have no further questions.
Yes. Thank you, Leanne.
Thank you.
You are excused. Oh, I'm sorry.
I'm so sorry. I just want to ask just 3 follow-up questions on behalf of Augis, the Australian Union of Jewish Students.
Yes, very well, Ms. Crafty.
Thank you.
Liat, you gave evidence to the Commission that Israel is part of your Jewish identity, and you've given evidence about slogans you heard chanted on campus. You recall that evidence? And how you felt when you heard those slogans. Can I ask you this? If a student leader had called for the elimination of the State of Israel and for violent protest, how would you have felt hearing that?
I mean, first of all, they did call for those things on the occasion, and I think to eliminate any state is a direct threat to the people who live in that state. It's incredibly intimidatory. It makes me feel very fearful as a person who is an Israeli citizen and has family there, and to call to eliminate a state is not to engage in criticism. Also, it's to call for the elimination of a thing. You can't criticise something you don't want to exist.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Yes. Well, I'll try again, Leah. You are excused.
Thank you very much.
And I'll now take a 15-minute morning adjournment.